Welcome. I'm glad you're all here. We're going to get started. I'm just going to keep my eye on if there is anybody waiting in the waiting room as this goes. But I would like to introduce myself. Probably many of you know who I am. I'm Sandy Martin. I go by she, her pronouns. I am the business development leader for the Muskoka Community Land Trust. And I'm speaking to you from Gravenhurst. Our office is in Bracebridge, but I'm at home today. So I'm joined by Chris Jordan Stevens, who is, he's many things. He is at Community Living Huntsville. He's a manager there. And he is also the chair of Muskoka Community Land Trust. And we are also joined by Matt Adams, who is at the Fourth Pig Green and Natural Construction Worker Co-op. And he is from the G.R.E.A.T organization. That's kind of where he's going to be speaking into today for today's presentation. So with that, Chris, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thanks, Sandy. Hello, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the sunlight today. So we're going to go through a few things. Today, we're going to give sort of an overview of what community land trusts are, how they function, and sort of what some of their benefits are to our community. Sandy, do you see that Jennifer Turnover's trying to enter? Can I admit her? Oh, you got it? Okay. Just want to make sure everyone who wants to get in can. And then we're going to talk more specifically about the community land trust that started in Muskoka and where we're kind of at, what our mission is, and how we see ourselves aligning with our community goals. Then I'm passing it on to Matt Adams, who's going to talk about a really exciting project called the G.R.E.A.T project, which is an acronym I won't spell out right now, if that's okay. Matt, I'm going to give you that honor. Okay. And then we're going to pass it back to Sandy and sort of look at community alignment. And I then will, end it with some sort of discussion of benefits to our community specifically and a few specific projects we've got in the go. And then we'll open it up for some questions, which is really probably the best part of these presentations, to hear from community members. So Sandy, if we can start firing off these, do I have control? I don't. Okay, so Community Land Trust 101, very elementary sort of discussion. So community land trusts are community-led, nonprofit organizations. And what they do is they hold land for a variety of community purposes. So that can be housing, but it could also be agriculture. So like a lot of agricultural land trusts were like sort of the inception of land trusts. It had a lot to do with agricultural. There's conservation land trusts. Currently, we're just the land trust. Our focus has been housing, providing housing, but this is really about their long-term. A land trust is a long-term steward of the land, and it sees the land as a community asset and as something that the public own and have a stake in, rather than a commodity. Which, there's a real estate market that treats property and land as commodity, and that's going to continue to exist. But what land trusts can do is they can hold land in trust for community interests and for nonprofit social enterprises, and then use the improvements on that land in many different ways. So, Sandy, if you want to punch through the next slide, be great. Just move this. So how does it really work? There's a bunch of different models, as I say. So we could provide housing on a land trust because the land trust holds the land, and somebody could come and develop that land, and we would retain the ownership of the land. But let's say there's homes that people sell, and those homes would then be those improvements, but would be sold, but we would retain ownership of the land. A rental building comes up, and let's say there's a landlord where there's rentals, we're keeping it affordable, and however, we maintain ownership of the land. That allows us to create certain restrictive covenants potentially to make sure that those community interests continue to be served. So really, community land trusts own the land. They develop buildings sometimes. Sometimes they bring in developers. The units are funded by community land trusts and typically a mixture of private, nonprofit, and public funds. Stakeholders are wide-ranging because the land trust is a model that can really do a lot of things. But the stakeholders include community agencies like the one I work at in Huntsville, developers, local government, and private sector. So what we're looking at is, we're providing housing on these, we can really sort of target certain groups of people in our community that really are struggling with getting rental housing or buying a first home, or, who want to move here to work but have no hope of successfully finding a place to live. So those are some of the things we have in mind as we're sort of, coming close to our first projects. We also want to use the land efficiently, and we want to use it again not as a commodity, but as something that interests the public well-being. Next slide. Okay, this is a sort of a home ownership model example of how a land trust would work to provide some below market rate housing. So step one here on the left side would be that the community land trust would acquire land through typically some kind of donation or purchase agreement with a private seller. And they would then develop improvements on that land. So a developer might come in and um, you know, build these homes and then sell them to individuals for, pre-qualified individuals that met certain, demographic sort of labels, however we'd want to assign them. So let's say we wanted to offer, 5 houses to people at 80% area median income. We could target that. Now, the interesting thing about a land trust is because it retains ownership of the land, the homeowner pays sort of lease fees to the land trust, which helps with operational costs of the land trust. But when they sign on, there's typically some kind of resale restriction. And so that when the person has built equity and wants to sell this improvement, this home, the resale restriction will mean that they have to sell it to someone of the similar demographic for when they bought it. So it remains affordable in perpetuity. So that's just, I think, that's one of the ways this can work. One of the benefits of this is that the value of the community, the value the community brings to a development is actually returned to the community, right? You can buy an improvement on land and it can appreciate in value just because of the community development, and you can sell it at a giant cost. We've seen in the last couple of years at sort of a giant value, pricing a lot of people out of the market. But this kind of structure allows that value that the community is adding to the land to return back into the community. So we try to keep the value of land and development within the community itself. These are very abstract concepts, I know, and Sandy's going to talk more specifically about the Muskoka Community Land Trust, but I'm speaking quite broadly now about land trusts. And any way along the way, I should add, in the bottom left-hand corner of this slide, we're looking at ways to deeply subsidize these developments, right? Whether that's through land donations, there's some savings that at the end, because we're a nonprofit, will end up with the users. There's government and private grants, there's grants through CMHC that are awarded, there are community donations. So we want to draw from all sources as possible to keep housing as affordable and accessible and inclusive for as many community members as we possibly can. Next slide. So the Community Land Trust provides security of tenure to community enterprises that supports basic needs. This is another example of what you can use a land trust for. So, for example, gardens. There could be gardens. We could have a land trust retain ownership, and then there's a not-profit community garden or year-round greenhouses, which support food security in a community or sovereignty for the community to have control of what it does with those lands. So the community enterprise in this case is a viable business owner that reinvests profits to cover running costs and paid employment rather than extracting them from community for private gain. So so you could use housing, but you could also have community gardens, and you could do both. You can, like I said, it's up ultimately to the land trust to decide if the improvements on that land are beneficial in the way that they set out to be. Next slide, please. So in the States, this is a tried and true method. There are really important examples of land trusts in Canada, and also they are really starting to pop up. Sandy? There's large and a growing network of land trusts operating in Canada, and a lot of communities are seeing this as a really strong player in solving affordable housing issues, food security issues, and actually to start for planning purposes to start building really class inclusive and able in terms of ability inclusive and inclusive in terms of gender, to build communities that really reflect the diversity within it. But it's because it's these are some new, ideas for Canada. There's, some really important things that we need to make sure we have as a land trust, which is a sustainable business plan, like any nonprofit I know requires strong leadership and administration. We have a strong board, and of course we have Sandy as our employee, and she's, doing a wonderful job. We also need a lot of community support, which is what we're doing now. We're reaching out, doing some education and outreach. We're looking for community support constantly. We're looking for community partners to see if they, if they want to stake in some of this and some of these improvements and what that might look like. And of course, we have to find funding and capitalization, especially because the more funding we receive and from the various sources, the more affordable at the end of the day the better the housing we're able to provide from an affordability standpoint, from an environmental standpoint. We also need to build capacity. We're the Muskoka Community Land Trust. So the things that we do in one community, we hope to spread throughout our district as a whole, and we want to play a role in each of our wonderful enclaves. And then we also need to talk, and we don't want to reinvent wheels, and we want to share knowledge. So one of the wonderful things about being a nonprofit is we get to share ideas with our competitors, especially if they're good ones, right? And so I know that we are, constantly in conversation with other community land trusts, but who are kind of, not quite at our level of development, people who are kind of analogous to our level of development, and then people who have, are 4 or 5 steps ahead and we can learn from. So we also need government support, which we've received municipally so far, but we're of course looking to expand that into the higher levels of government. I think that's those slides, right, Sandy, or was there something else?
There was just the examples of some of those more.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So some examples of some really successful community land trusts you might know. There's the Toronto Island, of course. That's a famous old one in Toronto. There's the Parkdale Land Trust, but this here is the Northern Community Land Trust. And sorry, it's escaping me right now, Sandy. Where is this land trust being built currently?
Whitehorse.
It's in Whitehorse. That's right. And there's an example of we've learned quite a lot in conversation with them. They're an excellent resource, and they've really activated their municipality and their government in a really interesting way to make something real come to be in a fairly rural area. I mean, I know Whitehorse is a city, but it's not. So there's things we can really learn from them. So I'm going to pass it to Sandy now to talk more about our Muskoka Community Land Trust.
Thanks, Chris. So of course, what we're doing here in Muskoka is in part, the genesis came from, many conversations, but really the real spark was the District of Muskoka Housing and Homelessness Task Force in 2019. So as Chris said, there's been so much like mind-blowing municipal support for what we're doing here in Muskoka. And actually some of our land trust colleagues that we talk to in the network are, I wouldn't say jealous because we're all really happy for each other, but they're very excited for us to see that level of support that we have. So we continue to be very grateful for that. So the snapshot that we're using, of course, this looks at Muskoka, and some of these numbers are already out of date, but we can talk specifically about the Huntsville initiative. We've got demographics for each area, but when we look at Muskoka as a whole, we know that there's a lot of people that live here from varying, types of income, varying family structures, varying types of work that they do, but there are a lot of low-income families. There's a lot of service industry employees, and a lot of more would be needed if they could find housing. We all have experienced that or have heard people talk about it, and we do have a lot of retirees. We know that the area median income for Muskoka is actually, again, these numbers depends on what census you're looking at and what numbers, but we can agree it's somewhere around $79,000, $80,000, depending on where you are in the area. And that's for households. And of course, households come in different sizes, but that's why we talk about median, where half is lower and half is higher. And then for individuals, it's somewhere around the $30,000 a year. And so when we know about the resources people have, their income, And we know what property prices and rentals are. So we know that the median property price, this is a non-waterfront piece of land or a piece of property that we're talking about. So in July, non-waterfront was going for 795,000, and that changes a little bit, and we're kind of in the middle of a bit of a slide right now. But still, when you see that the cost of a home, the median cost of a home compared to the median income, already you can start to see a disconnect there. And same thing with rent. Now, this is a one-bedroom, $1,100 a month average rent. We all kind of suspect that that's a bit underreported. I don't know that that's representative of our area specifically, but we do know that rental vacancy rates across Muskoka are 0% with the potential for like a rounding error of a little bit. But like we are really functionally there is nowhere to rent in Muskoka. And if you can rent, the cost, if you are an individual with $26,000 per year in income, you're kind of out of luck. And it's a real problem for people, of course. And again, we know that. So one of the things that we like to think about is definitions. So when we're talking about what is affordable, sometimes we're going to talk about what's on the ground affordable for someone, or we'll talk about what the CMHC thinks is affordable. So right now we're going to talk about CMHC, which is defining affordable as long as housing, which also includes heat and property taxes, some of the things that are not just, rent or mortgage payments, but as long as it's 30% or less of pre-tax household income, that's considered affordable to CMHC. And so then when we start to mix those numbers again, so there's the median income, the median rent, the median home purchase price, we know that that math doesn't scan. It doesn't add up. There's very few homes to buy that a household earning $80,000 a year could purchase. There are very few homes to rent that a household earning that $80,000 could rent. There's definitely even fewer where somebody earning $26,000 or less could rent. And that's not even to talk about people who are on ODSP or Ontario Works. There's almost nothing for those people to be able to afford. So that's okay. That's the need, right? Again, we're going to start with some facts. So when Muskoka Community Land Trust was formed in response to that need, the mission is to be community-led, to be led by the people who are in need of housing, to respond to those needs from a nonprofit perspective. So it's not for private gain, it's for public good. And we want to benefit Muskoka because, like Chris was explaining, for community land trusts, we acquire and steward land for the long term. The intention is to get in and stay in and continue to manage these properties, businesses, parks, forest lands, anything that comes under our purview, to manage them with the eye of community benefit, long-term community benefit, which might mean perpetually affordable housing, or it might mean one of these other really amazing social goods that our community could benefit from. This is all built around our values, of course. So some of the things that we've picked out as an organization as being very important to how we implement the work that we're doing. So it's not just talk, we want to put it into action, right? With the way this is designed, we want our communities to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive. I don't think anybody could argue with that. We want to build with environmental accountability in mind. We want to leverage collective land ownership, collective viewing of land as something that should benefit the whole community. And then we also want to build these cooperative relationships with our partners here in town, with end users, people who will live in the homes that we build or use the gardens or any of those things. We want to deal with them with transparency, respect, and we want to use the power of collective action. So this we have, I can't even tell you how proud I am to be part of an organization, to serve as a staff member to the board that has kind of this breadth and depth of experience. So these are all people that are volunteering their time to push this forward and to make the specific things that we're working on right now that I'll talk to you about in a minute, but also just kind of this vision for Muskoka. These people are dedicating a significant amount of time, it's creative energy to this. So this is, I just feel really encouraged about the success of the initiatives that are kind of going on with these people because of that breadth and depth of experience. There is a strategic plan in place that is moving forward. There's been a lot of traction in the last couple of years. I mean, it starts actually with 2019, but here we are, even just in the last 2 years, funding from the District of Muskoka for operational capacity. That read for Sandy and some other things, but really so that we can do the things that we say we want to do. A specific grant for the Huntsville initiative to get it kind of ready for investment. So from CMHC and other funding partners. That operational capacity includes, the professional pieces that we need to be, an entity that conforms to or follows the rules. So we have an accountant, obviously, bookkeeper. We've got a lawyer working on the some of the pieces that would come with the donation of land, for example, from the town of Huntsville. We're working with a consultant, a business consultant, on that business plan that Chris mentioned as being kind of one of those hallmarks of success for a community land trust. We've had a lot of really good consulting work on the ongoing viability of our initiatives from a rural development network, from a couple of different partners. And then ongoing, there are board governance is developing. Steering committees on kind of at the local level are starting to coalesce and kind of talk about these initiatives from the local, kind of micro local needs. And what we're doing right now, community outreach and engagement, all of these pieces, the discussion with the town of Huntsville that just kind of got approved to move forward to the next step at the end of October, that is developing. The design of the Florence Street site, that's in development, as everyone knows. That's kind of a draft development plan, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means in a moment. And then, working on building a donation system. All of these things are happening. There's work being done on them. And so that's why we have these once a month. There's almost always something different that's happening. So this piece, I think, is very important, where we fall on the housing continuum as the MCLT right now. This doesn't mean that this is the only thing the MCLT is ever going to work on, but right now, as we move into speaking about specifically the initiative that we're working on for Florence Street in Huntsville, this is that box that we're looking at. There's a very big gap, like we talked about, the why. In Muskoka, in other places of the world as well, there is a gap in the availability of affordable rental housing and homeownership housing. So that's really the kind of the stage that we've set for what we're looking to do first. So this initiative in Huntsville has been in process for a long time. There has been a tremendous amount of energy put into it by people like Ben, Suzanne on our board. The mayor of Huntsville has had a lot to do with his counselors. There's just been a lot of work gone in to continually evolve the plan for Florence Street until it becomes the very best it can be within the constraints of the property and what's available and what's needed and what's affordable. All those pieces have to come together. But right now, the draft is that it's a piece of land on Florence Street. It is within walking distance to the downtown core and lots of the necessary services that we would want, community members to have access to from very close to where they live. It's a beautiful 7-acre lot. It's a reforested piece of land, and there is room right now. Again, the density plan that we have right now is for 161 units. We need to further develop that. That's the draft piece, but we do see that there's room for, some multi-residential rental buildings, townhomes, some bungalows maybe, and then 2 6-plex cooperative units. Again, Matt is going to talk more about that, the G.R.E.A.T project. But so that the target really is, as Chris was saying, as a CLT, what we can do is use this affordable housing stewardship, this perpetual stewardship of the land to target people specifically in demographics that are kind of even disproportionately affected by the housing crisis. So people in need of affordable rentals, people in need of a home that they have, for the long term. So we do have targets. And again, this is a developing plan. So right now we're looking for being able to offer, quote unquote, according to CMHC, affordable rental units, hopefully some deeply affordable units, so even kind of exceeding those CMHC affordability targets. And then for people being able to buy a home, when we get into that part of the plan where we start building, home ownership pieces, kind of in later stages, we're looking so that people who earn between 80 and 110% of the area median income, we talked about that, $80,000 per household, are able to buy a house. are able to pay a mortgage on that house. And we've talked to funding partners about putting those pieces in place. But the idea, of course, is that we're building a healthy micro community, which means it's not just a group of homes, and it's not just a group of homes for a specific demographic. It's a mix of people from all sorts of incomes, all sorts of life experiences, all sorts of demographics, and it's designed so that people have space, communal outdoor space, gardens, places for people to walk safely and play and enjoy some of the beautiful outdoor landscape that we have available to us in Muskoka. We're so lucky here. And then the construction, again, all of this is draft, but we know that we can do some good for the climate or less harm for the climate in the way we make choices about how we build. And so all of these pieces are part of how this plan is coming together, again, with those really good cooperative conversations that we're having with community members. So this is that project at a glance. This is a piece that we use when we're talking to potential funders, but I think it is a very helpful, our Launch and Prosper consultants put this together, Kyla Taylor. It's a really lovely piece that just talks, again, it brings all those pieces that Chris was talking about in a home ownership or in a rental model. It puts it together to speak to what Florence Street could be. And now some of the pieces here have changed already since the last time that this was updated. So you can see kind of this green section down here, block C, these rental units, that's actually going to be happening in the current draft plan. That's going to be happening first. And there will be, real estate sold as a life lease. So we retain the land and then people purchase the ability to live in the home that we build for as long as that lease covers. But that's not going to be the first thing that happens. So, these pieces are constantly in development. And so, again, if you've seen any of the pieces that have been released, to the public as of the end of October, those plans have already changed in ways that are being responsive to community feedback and stakeholder feedback. So this, it's really just to give you an idea. What I'd love to have is the same thing that Chris was pointing to, the Northern Land Trust, where they have a render and it kind of gives you an idea of what the feel of that micro community would be. We don't have that yet, but that's fine. So this is sort of the idea, though, I wanted to give you of, the evolution of the first phase. This was kind of the third phase at one point in the plan. So right now, this is the idea that we're looking to, keep refining this business plan to do. Now that's enough for me. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Matt, and you can talk specifically about the G.R.E.A.T project.
Sure. Thanks, Sandy. Thanks, everybody. You can go to the next slide, please, Sandy. So as said in the beginning, I'm from an organization called Fourth Pig Green and Natural Construction. We're a nonprofit worker co-op that does environmental building, been around since 2007. But we started to really explore the possibility of working in affordable housing around 2020, partially in response again to that same report. And our general manager was involved with the early discussions around the creation and formation of the MCLT, Melinda Zeteric. And we were able to get some funding from the Investment Readiness Program, the IRP as well, to explore if this was even possible, like a feasibility study. How can we do this? We talked to people all across the country that were in land trusts or did affordable housing under other models. We talked to architects about what would our buildings look like, because we understood from our perspective the twin connection between the climate crisis and the housing crisis. And we didn't want to be building housing that was as bad for the environment as many of the sort of affordable housing buildings and general buildings are that go up. So after we did that research, we were able to apply for another special one-time grant out of the NHS for demonstrating the use of affordable housing and land trusts. So the Fourth Pig partnered with the MCLT, along with some other folks, Caris Disability, Community Living, Two Tree Passive Homes, to begin to explore like actually doing this work. And one of the main parts of this would be, you can see our vision there. This is an architectural rendering of a sixplex unit. We got designs that actually can be built as 2, 4, 6, 8. The construction drawings are complete. They finished last week. Next slide, please. But one of the key things in all this, I guess it goes to environment first. So these buildings have been designed to be super energy efficient. So they use a lot less energy than a similar code home. This modeling is based on the Huntsville region. So it uses almost 90% less energy costs. It's also designed for durability, like just to last. The materials used in the building are healthier for people on the planet than are those that are sometimes used in construction. And sort of lower upfront carbon, as we call it. Some materials take a lot of energy to create. And so even though you can use them in a high efficiency building, you kind of end up in a energy deficit. So all that was part of the framework of designing these buildings and these prototypes. Next slide, please. Our hope is that when we build, that the majority of the units will be very, very affordable. These are targets. When we started, that was 10 interest increases ago, and things have become a lot more expensive. And we don't know what the final numbers will be, but those numbers will probably change over time as well. If maybe our first couple builds, we won't hit that 60% threshold, but as we build more and get more experience, and as interest rates hopefully come down, we might be able to get that number up. But when I say we, it's going to involve creating a brand new organization, which is a community development co-op. So when we say this is a co-op, we don't mean a housing co-op like you might be aware of. This is a different kind of thing. This is a model that's more prevalent in the United States, but is here in Ontario, particularly in Kitchener-Waterloo, with an organization called the Union Cooperative. They use community investment to acquire buildings that are on the market and either preserve affordable housing or create affordable housing. Our difference is that following their model, that we are going to be building new housing. Next slide, please. So members will include community supporters, tenants, and subtenants. So someone who wishes to invest in affordable housing can invest by buying shares in the cooperative and be a member. Someone that's looking for housing could be a tenant or possibly a subtenant. So we might have situations where a nonprofit or charitable organization rents a unit, and then they sub-rent to one of their clients or partners. And then in this case, in the development we're talking about, the G.R.E.A.T cooperative will just be like another building owner that owns a building on their development. They will pay a lease fee to MCLT for MCLT to help maintain the development. That might be it. So I'll just say there's a lot more information on greathousing.org, especially under the news and blog section. And there's also a little story map that follows the history of the project. That's a living document. We updated it a lot. And I'll be around afterwards to answer questions. Thank you, Sandy.
Thanks, Matt. I think this next piece is you, Chris.
Okay, there's one I'm going to skip because we're at 1:30 and I want to make sure there's sufficient time for questions, if that's okay. But I am going to talk about our objectives a little bit, which I think you've heard a bit about, but I think we're really looking at developing healthy, innovative, and permanent housing solutions for our community. We want to reduce barriers to ownership, median income owners, another objective, to protect affordability now and going forward. That's one of the real strengths of the land trust model. To design and build responsibly and in consideration for the environmental impact and energy consumption of our improvements on the land, to demonstrate the benefits, and then to establish, to strengthen our bones as an organization so that we can take projects in all over Muskoka. And then we need to develop further and foster more local partnerships with anyone who's interested and energized to take something like this on. And like I said, we want to do we're working towards creating models that are easily replicable so that, we can pick something up and run with it to make our towns and our villages better places to live. Next slide, I think, is the one I'm going to skip because I feel like we've talked a lot about benefits. Are you comfortable with that, Sandy? I feel like we have, because I do want to ask, these are the things we're asking for. This is, so we're constantly searching for grant opportunities, for infrastructure services. We're grants for environmental standards. We've asked the District of Muskoka, we've to advocate at the local, the provincial, and the federal governments to support us. And then so these are some of the asks we've asked government. Next slide, please, Sandy. So we've got community partners currently with Fourth Pig, Community Living, which is my organization, G.R.E.A.T Disability Services, which is previously known as Christian Horizons, and Passive Homes, Took Tree Passive Homes. There's also members from our board that are on a steering committee for G.R.E.A.T project with Matt just described. We're always looking for other community organizations that are to talk to that are interested in this kind of project. We're looking for committee members for certain projects, and we're also looking, to always diversify our board to have as many voices as possible on that board, because it should represent our community. That board should, and we've got a great board, but we always are looking to strengthen it. Next slide. Oh, okay. I've already said this, I think, Sandy? Okay. So you can visit, and I would urge you to visit muskokaclt.org to apply to serve on a committee or the board as a board director. We need people from all walks of life, and that's true. So if you feel like I don't know anything about building, but I do know a lot about community development, or vice versa, I don't know anything about community development, but I know a lot about building. Like put your name in the because we want it to be representative of our end users, right? That's what we want the board to represent. So speak to your community organizations, people spread the word about us, and please reach out if you need to. There's also an opportunity to donate if you're interested, which is also at our website. So you can find all of that stuff there.